Good morning. I hope you're doing good today. Thank you for those who are joining us on Zoom, for those of you who are listening in the car, and for those of you who are here as well. Happy to be with you today. We're actually in a series right now that I didn't really tell you about. This is kind of week 3 of a 3-week series. If you remember, 2 weeks ago we talked about loving God and having a personal relationship with God. And we talked about not being spoon-fed Christians, but making it your own, having a personal relationship with God. And then last week we talked about loving others and the importance that it is that we go out into the world and that we love other people. And then today we're going to talk about the Great Commission, which is to make disciples. And so if I were to title the series, this would be talking about the greats, the 2 greatest commandments, and then today we're going to talk about the Great Commission. So if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 28, that's where you can find the Great Commission. If you've grown up in the church, I'm sure you've heard this verse many times, but we're going to talk about today what it looks like to do that and the importance of actually obeying the Great Commission. So Matthew 28, 18 through 20 is where we'll find the Great Commission, and this is something that I think we should all be passionate about. This is something that personally I have a passion for. This has been our mission statement for the youth ministry for the last 4 years, is to make disciples who make disciples, because that's what Jesus did. And each week, the past few weeks, we've gone back to look at the example of Jesus. And when we look at how Jesus had his relationship with the Lord, with the Father, it was one that we should model after. He was intentional about making time for that. And then we look at how Jesus loved others, and he did it always. He would always love first. We talked about these wristbands. He would love first. And so today, as we talk about making disciples, let's consider the example of Jesus as well. And we know that he had his disciples. So if you're there, Matthew 28, 18 through 20, this is what the Great Commission is. Jesus said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." That is the Great Commission. That's what we've been called to do. But what I want to talk about today is the Good Commission. This is what I think the church, a lot of Christians, we have done. We've taken the Great Commission and we've downgraded it to the Good Commission. Here's how I think that would be interpreted. Jesus said, "Therefore, go and make church members of all nations, or church attendees of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey most of what I've commanded you. And surely I will be with you to the very end of the age." See, the difference is, the Great Commission, Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations. But what I think we have done is we've taken that word disciple out and we've replaced that with church attenders. And we've made church attenders the people who show up to church, and we're all about the numbers, and we want to make sure that we get the right people. And I know I've fallen victim to this as well. I want to get teenagers to the youth group. I just want to get people there, and I want to build our numbers up, and we want to have a certain amount of people that go to church here. But we've replaced discipleship with membership. And we're worried about getting church attenders rather than making disciples, and that's a huge difference. And so today we're going to look at that difference of not just getting people here, not just telling people about God or inviting them to church, but making disciples. That changes everything. And so I've watched a lot of videos this week and prepared for this sermon, and a lot of pastors and preachers are saying that this is a problem, especially in America, but this is something that we're not focusing on enough. We're too worried about the conversions and not about the discipleship. And so we've got to focus on that. It's easy to have a conversion, and it's great. You know, if you've ever seen somebody get baptized, it's a beautiful moment to watch somebody go from death to life and give their life to the Lord. That's one of the greatest things that we can ever experience. But that's not the commission. The commission is to make disciples. And so we got to make sure that we're focused on that. And one of the videos that I watched is by a guy named Francis Chan. You may be familiar with him. He wrote a book called Crazy Love. And he was a preacher out in California for a long time, started a church and built it up to thousands of people. And then he kind of was convicted that maybe that's not what God's calling him to right now. God is convicting him to make disciples. Sure, he'll preach to the masses and he'll give these great messages and sermons, but God is calling him to discipleship. And one of the things that he says in one of his videos is that Satan will do anything to keep us from making disciples. Satan is probably pleased with us coming to church and hearing a message and going home the same. Satan will get us to read our Bibles and not do anything with it. Satan is probably okay with us studying or getting ready for a sermon or coming to church or doing VBS or all these things that we do that are good things, of course, as Christians. but it's not making disciples, because Satan knows that that's what will change the world. And so I love the way that he words that, is that Satan will get us to do anything other than make disciples, because he knows that making disciples is what's going to change the world. So let's talk about that today. Do you think Jesus was strategic when he was here on this earth? I think what he did was very intentional. How many disciples did Jesus have? He had 12 disciples, and he poured into them, right? Jesus, like Francis Chan, he had times where he spoke to the masses, and he did miracles, and he fed thousands of people, and he did all these kinds of incredible things. But what did he also do? He poured into the lives of 12 people. He invested into them everywhere that he went. They walked alongside of him. He walked alongside of them. And everywhere that he went, he poured into those disciples to make sure that he was teaching them how to love other people, how to love God, and then how to tell others about God. And that's what he did. And so Jesus was so intentional with his strategy about doing this. And that's something that was already around at the time. Jesus did not invent the idea of discipleship, which being a disciple just means a follower or a learner. And in Jesus' time, they would have had rabbis already that had followers, that people would follow around them and listen to them. So Jesus didn't reinvent the wheel. He just took it and he made it the most effective ministry tool that anyone's ever had, because he poured into the lives of people who then took it and poured into other people's lives. So strategy is something that we're familiar with. Raise your hand if you like the game chess. You like to play the game chess or grew up playing it? I still don't know how to play chess. I've been taught a couple times, and I forget every time. I know that the horse, you can go up 2 and over 1, and I know the pawns, you can go up 1 or 2 at the beginning, and that's about it. So I don't know a lot of the strategy, and that's why, to my knowledge, I've never won a game of chess, because I don't know how to. I know the objective, but I don't know how to get there. And so sometimes I'll just make a move that I hope is the right move, or hope is something effective, and then the opponent that I'm playing clearly knocks my piece out, and I realize that they know what they're doing. That's one of those games that you've got to have strategy to win. You can make some good moves, and you can get lucky here or there, but really those who have the right strategy are the ones who are going to win. Those who understand how it works, those are the ones who are going to win. If you like sports, you know that there's all kinds of strategy in sports. Depending on the team that you're playing, might determine how you're going to match up against them. I'm a Miami Heat fan, and if you're following the NBA Finals right now, it's not looking good for us. We lost the first 2 games, but they're trying different strategies. They're trying to figure out how to guard the other team. How do you guard the Lakers? And the Lakers are trying to figure out how to guard the Heat. And in football and all kinds of other sports, you match up differently depending on what you're up against. And so strategy is so important, and we understand that. But so did Jesus. Jesus took 12 ordinary people like you and I hope you find encouragement in this today, that Jesus changed the world with 12 people like you and me. He took ordinary, unschooled people that were just living their lives, and he took them, he invested in them, and then they changed the world through that. And so Jesus realized what he was doing. He was intentional about what he did, not just making random choices. And so as I talked to my dad about this sermon, one of the things that he mentioned to me is good is the enemy of great. And I think in our church, a lot of times we settle for good, the good commission, like I mentioned earlier, not the great commission. The reason good is the enemy of great is because we can be okay with doing stuff that's not making disciples. We can be okay with not doing the most important things because we check off the list that we came to church, or we did what we were supposed to, and we're a good person, and we have a Bible study every now and then, or we pray every so often for our meals and stuff like that. But good is the enemy of great, and I want to challenge today that we are settling for good things that go with following Jesus, and we're not doing the great things. The Great Commission is to make disciples, not to make conversions or to make church attendees. And so Jesus knew what he was doing before he left earth. After he had risen from the dead, he gave this Great Commission to the disciples because Jesus realized, I'm about to leave. I'm about to leave this earth, and I need someone to carry out this mission. And so Jesus put it into their hands. And every one of us here today, everyone listening, is going to leave this earth at some point. We don't want to think about that, and it can be sad news, but the truth is one day we'll leave this earth. And are we leaving the mission of Jesus behind when we leave? Is it going to stop when we die? Or are we leaving it in the hands of others who are going to pass it on as we leave? Are you discipling someone in your life? Is there someone, it may be your children or your grandkids or your neighbor or a stranger, but am I discipling anyone right now? If I died today, would anyone carry this message on? when you die, are there people that you know that are going to continue to making disciples because you've passed that on to them? We'll talk about that in a minute. So let me pause and ask you a would you rather question. I love would you rather questions. As a youth minister, I get to ask them a lot because teenagers love them as well. And some of you may have heard this one before, but I want to get your response on this, and so you get to raise your hand in a second here. But the would you rather question is, would you rather have $1 million today, you get it right now, or you can have 1 penny that is doubled in its value every day for 30 days. So you can take $1 million today, or you can take a penny that doubles in value each day for 30 days. It would go to 2 cents on the second day, and then 4 cents, and so on and so on. So let's see a show of hands. How many of you would take the 1 million today? Okay, we got some people that are like, yeah, give me the money now. I'll go ahead and take that. That is fine. I don't blame you. That's $1 million today. That would be life-changing. How many of you would take the penny that doubles every day for 30 days? Okay, so you might have known the answer. The truth is, if you wait till the 30th day, it would have been the right decision to take the penny that doubles every day. Because by the 30th day, it would have been $5.3 million. And I was like, that can't be right. And I did the math, and I did it again and double-checked. Mr. Joe Jones, you can check me on this, see if that's right. But by the 30th, I got a thumbs up there. By the 30th day, it had gotten to $5 million. So if you had taken the $1 million, you would have settled for 5 times less than what you could have gotten. And we'll talk about this in a second, because at some point, that $1 million would have been the right decision up until day 27. At day 27, you still would have had more money than the penny that was doubling, but then by the 28th day, you got more than $1 million, and then by the 29th day, you got way more than $1 million, and then by the 30th day, you had over $5 million. And so it's the difference between multiplication and addition. And a lot of times in the church, we settle for addition, which is you invite somebody to church, we get them here to church, and then that's all that there is they're here at church. But the difference, multiplication, is you invite somebody here to church, we disciple that person, and that person becomes a disciple, and then that person can go out and invite more people to church who become a disciple. And it's not all about getting them to church. That's not the goal. The goal is to get them to be a disciple. And so it may start by inviting them to your house, or it may start by inviting them to a small group or to lunch or whatever, and it may be getting them here to church. But the goal is to make disciples, and that has a huge impact. So I don't know how many of you are math people. I know we've got some in the room, but there's some statistics that I read on this. And when I preached a couple years ago about making disciples, I mentioned some of these statistics that I went back and watched this video again this week, and it just blew me away. If you were to imagine one evangelist in this world, we'll call him Paul, like Paul from the Bible. If Paul, we took one person and he evangelized and converted 1,000 people per day, for every day since let's say he was 10 years old when he started doing this, and he evangelized and converted 1,000 people per day, do you know how long it would take him, or how old he would be by the time he reached the entire world in a frozen population? If you were to freeze the population as it is, he would be 15,010 years old by the time that he reached the whole world. It would take over 15,000 years for one person to convert the whole world for Jesus, even if they were reaching 1,000 people per day. Isn't that crazy? You take one person and convert 1,000 people a day, even in a frozen population, and it would take them 15,000 years just to reach that population. But instead, if you were to take one person, we'll call him Paul again, and Paul were to disciple someone else, one person per year, and they took a whole year to disciple one other person, to the point where that person, after year 1, was able to go and make another disciple and spend a whole year making a disciple, and then Paul would split off and make his second disciple in year 2. If that process continued without being broken, and each disciple after 1 year makes another disciple after another year, and then splits off and finds someone new and makes a new disciple, just starting with one, the entire world, even at a growing population rate that it is right now, would be reached for Jesus in less than 37 years. Isn't that crazy? I mean, it took me some time to fathom those numbers. You could go out, and some of you have invited a lot of people to church and have made a huge impact on people in your life, but even if you did 1,000 a day, it would take you 15,000 years to reach the population, and by then the population will keep growing and we'll never get there. But if just starting with one person. You took a whole year to disciple one person in your life, and then that disciple was ready to do that process again with someone else. We could reach the entire population of the world in less than 37 years for Jesus. That's insane. And we could have a head start today if we start with 100 or 200 people, and we start focusing on that right now. And I know there are other churches in the world that are focusing on discipleship. To me, that is so encouraging to know that in the church, in some of our lifetimes, we could see the entire world be reached for Jesus. In your children's lifetime, in your grandkids' lifetime, the whole world could be reached for Jesus if we take discipleship seriously. I think Jesus knew what he was doing. I don't know what kind of math classes he took when he was growing up. Probably not the same ones that we did. But he understood that multiplication was better than addition. And so Jesus was extremely effective with sending out the 12 to go and change the world. And I think that's what he's calling us to do today. So in James chapter 1, you can turn there if you want to. I'm just going to reference it. But this was the verse that John read earlier today. In James chapter 1, verse 22, it talks about not just being a listener, but being a doer of the word. Don't just listen to the words, but actually do it. And so if you've grown up around the church, you've heard the Great Commission before, but it only means so much if we just hear it. It means way more if we actually do it. And even if you hadn't heard that before, you've heard it today. You know that Jesus is calling us to make disciples. And so there's a huge difference between just hearing those words and just doing those words. And Francis Chan, that I mentioned to you earlier, he tells this funny story about his daughter, and it goes along the lines of this discipleship. He said, what if I were to go to my daughter and say, hey, Rachel, go clean your room. And she goes away, and 2 hours later she comes back and she says, Dad, I memorized exactly what you said. You said, hey, Rachel, go clean your room. That's not the point. She said, yeah, well, I know how to say it in Greek too. That wasn't the point. She said, no, I'm gonna invite some of my friends over, and we're gonna have a study on what it would look like if I cleaned my room. He's like, no, she knows better. The point was not to memorize it. The point was not to quote it in Greek. The point was not to invite people over and have a study about what it would look like if we did it. The point was, I wanted you to clean your room. I wanted you to actually do it. And Francis Chan's point was, we're all going to face God at some point. And are we going to be there and say, God, I know the Great Commission. I can say it back to you. I memorized it. And I know it in Greek, or I know how to say it in another language, or I know all about it, and I know what we should have done. No, he's going to say, did you do it? He's going to want to know, where are you making disciples? Not how many of you can memorize it or quote it back to me. So the point is, we've got to make sure that we're doing this. And every one of you has a role in this. And it may look different than somebody else, which we'll talk about in a second. But we all have a part to play in this. And as we invite people into church and we invite people into our lives, we've got to disciple them as we go. And that's going to change people's lives, and it should change ours as well. And so as Francis Chan was talking about his daughter, it made me think, maybe that's where discipleship needs to start, is in the family. Think about your family. Have you been discipled by your parents or by your guardians? Are you discipling your kids, your grandkids? We've all got family somewhere, cousins, friends, people that are close to us in our lives, but maybe it starts in the family. Think about the impact that you're having on your kids, or that your parents had on you. Did they disciple you? Did they turn you into a disciple, or teach you how to obey God and to follow Jesus in everything that you do? And are you passing that on to others? I think it should probably start with the family for those of us who are here, but it definitely doesn't end there. We've got to go outside of the church, and we've got to love other people where they are. And so discipleship is something that is got to be taken seriously by all of us. And if we start within the church, that's going to model that for other people. I think about those who have been missionaries before, and I got to see, the influence of like Jeremy and Monica and the McKinneys down in Brazil, and you see the lives that they live, and you see the impact that they're having on the church there. But there are so many that are impacted by not just Jeremy preaching the word, but also by the lifestyle that Nicholas lived, and the way that Dylan treated other people, and the way that Miss Monica loved them, and the way that they handled themselves, and so many others. You see, my point is that everybody plays a role in that discipleship. Jeremy's role might be teaching the word of God to them, but the family's role might be encouraging them, or inviting them, and loving them, and being an example for them, and serving them. We all have a role to play in discipleship, and so we've got to make sure that we're doing that. So how many of you remember the quote that I gave last week? One of my favorite quotes. I said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's one of my favorite quotes because I think it's so true. People in our world, in our lives, they really, a lot of people don't care how much you know, how much scripture you've memorized, or if you can say the Great Commission back to them and you can tell them what John 3:16 says and you can quote some other things. They don't care about that until they know that you care about them. And so I want to challenge you the same thing I challenged you last week. As you go and love other people, live that example to them so that they can see your life has changed by Jesus, and then maybe they'll be interested in knowing more about it. In Acts 4:13, it talks about the disciples, and it says that they were ordinary, unschooled men, but because of their boldness and their courage, they could tell that they had been changed, and they could tell that they had been with Jesus. Can people tell in your life, can people tell when they look at my life that I've been with Jesus? Can they look at your life and see that something's different? If so, then that might open the door for you to tell them why you live that way and what's important to you. So as we kind of wrap up here today, I want to give you some simple steps that you can recreate. This is an easy way to remember, how do I make disciples? What do I do with this? How do I go home and make this happen? Or how do I go out into the world and make this happen? I'll give you 3 steps that these are not my own, but these are simple steps to borrow. There's 3 steps that repeat, and then the 4th step is to send people out. So the step number 1 is you do something and they watch. You model what it is to serve other people and to love other people. You do it, and somebody that you're trying to disciple is watching you do that. They see what you're doing. They learn from you. You're the teacher and they're the student. And then step number 2 is you guys do it together. They see you serve. They go with you. They hand out some food next time that you're going to take some food to someone who's homeless. They go alongside with you on the mission trip. They see what you're doing. They go to work with you, or they see you at the grocery store and how you handle the cashier, how you talk to them. And then step 3 is they do it and you watch. Then the roles reverse, and you get to see them go out and serve and love and treat other people the right way and live the way that Jesus is calling us to do. And you get to see them and see if they do things right, then you encourage them. If they mess up or they fall, then you help them to see where they went wrong. But if you repeat those cycles over and over, you do it and they watch, you guys do it together, and then they do it and you watch. You keep repeating that cycle until they're ready for step 4, which is to send them out and do it again. And I've seen this happen in a lot of the families here. I look around and I see several of you who are disciples, who are followers of Jesus, and I know the example, the life that you live. And then I look at your children and I see the life that they're living. I know that you've passed that on to them. And then I look at the life of even some of their kids, and I know that you're going to raise them up to do the same thing. But I'm encouraged by this because this is how we change the world. This is how Jesus changed the world. It was discipleship. And I know it's not flashy. We all might prefer to have 300 people here today or 500 people in this auditorium. Can you imagine what that would look like? That would be cool. That'd be flashy. And that's what we strive for sometimes. But what's going to be effective and what's going to reach the world is discipleship. I'd rather have 10 people in this room that are committed to making disciples and doing that with their life than 500 people in here that are just going to show up and be here. I'm not against you just being here, but the point is the commitment to making disciples is what's going to change everything. It's not just making church members or church attenders. So I want to leave you today with a challenge to make disciples where you are. Every one of you listening or here today, you have a different circle of influence than anyone else in the room. Do you agree with that? You're going to see different people, go to different restaurants, to different grocery stores, to different gas stations. You work at different places. Some of you are in different schools, different sports teams. Every single one of you listening, you have a different circle of influence than anyone else in this room. So God is calling you to make disciples where you are. Not everyone's going to be a missionary. Not everyone's going to be a preacher. Not everyone's going to go to the other side of the world to make disciples. And I think that's by design. We're outreaching the world and we're doing the best that we can with that, but also right here in Jolton and in Pleasant View and in White House and Springfield and Greenbrier, wherever you live, people need to be discipled. And it's a problem that we have in the church right now, but the good news is you're part of the solution. If every one of us takes this seriously, this is how we change the world. So I'll leave you with that. I pray that you are making disciples where you are today. I know some of you have done that. And your role might be bringing them into the church, and I'll give a message, or Jeremy or Joe or Kevin or somebody will preach a message to them But you can play a role by encouraging them, inviting them, loving them, writing them a note, serving them, whatever it is. We are on the same team. And so often in church we feel like we've got to be doing it all on our own, or we feel this burden of everyone's got to do everything. But that's not the case. We are all on the same team, and the mission should be the same together, that we're trying to make disciples. So if Skylar invites someone here to church, we've got to make sure that whatever that person needs to be discipled, we help with that. If I invite a friend that is really struggling and going through something in life that I know someone in here has gone through, I'm going to look to you to help them get through that and to help guide them to how God got you through that. We've got to work together on this, because discipleship is everything. That's what Jesus did, and he changed the world with it, and that's how we're going to change the world. So I pray that you take this seriously today. It's not a one-day thing. It's a long-term commitment to making disciples. But guys, if we take this seriously, this is how we reach the world way faster. I don't want to wait 15,000 years for other people to find out about Jesus. Do you? Do you want the rest of the world to know about Jesus? Because if so, then let's commit to making disciples, because that's how we're going to do it. That's how we're going to reach the world. And it's not just our church, it's everywhere. We've got to influence people to make disciples. It's not about us. This is about what Jesus did. And it's about making a connection to reach other people for Jesus. And how we do it is discipleship. So the mission is to reach the whole world. And the way we go about doing that is to make disciples. So I don't know where you are today, but I want to give an invitation. Some of you have been a disciple your whole life. Some of you have been a disciple for 50 years or more. And you understand what it means to follow Jesus. You get it. So maybe the call for you is to start discipling someone else and help them understand it. Maybe you're listening today and you're not a disciple. You haven't decided to give your life to Jesus yet or follow him. And maybe that's your call that God's put on your heart today, is to become a disciple. Step one to making disciples is for us to first be a disciple. And then step two is to make disciples of other people. So maybe you're in the category where you're already a disciple and you need to make some more. Or maybe you're not there yet, and your next decision needs to be to become a disciple. The great news is that Jesus died for us on the cross, and that he forgives our sins. And that's what in a minute, we're going to take communion to be reminded of that. That's the greatest thing I could preach any Sunday, is the good news of the gospel of Jesus, is that he gave his life for us, for sinners like you and I, so that we can one day spend eternity with him. And not everyone in the world knows that, and even if they know it, not everyone has really experienced that or accepted that. And so it is our call as the church to reach everybody for that. And so for anyone listening today, if you need to give your life to God, I challenge you to do it. I know most of you in here have, but there are others listening online, maybe you haven't. There's no better day to give your life to God than today. And I know that there are people in this room and listening out here that are ready to help you become a disciple. And those of us in here, we've got to stay passionate about making disciples. That's how we're going to change the world. So I'll leave you with that today. That'll be my final note. I know I said that 3 times, but this time I mean it. We got to make disciples. I think I've made that clear. Jesus made it clear, and it changed the world. So let's do that. So if you have any needs, come now as we stand, and John leads us in song.